Greetings, one and all. Happy new season week. It's finally here. After 6 weeks of pre-season, Hull City kick off against Coventry City in one of the early kickoffs at 12:30 on Saturday. But before that, we expect lots of news, or potentially some big news, obviously regard to incomings and also the status of the appeal. So I'm sure we'll get into all that at some point over the next half an hour or so with Catherine. How are you?
I'm very good, Baz. Very good. How are you?
I am, still cracking on, keeping my head above water. And Fletcher, there he is. How the devil are you?
I'm all right. It's nice to be talking to you face to face, Baz, rather than when I stunned you in the pre-season friendly against Sunderland when you were speaking to Jimbo from Radio Humberside, and I'm there talking in your ear without you even expecting it.
Oh yeah, you were coming in my ears, weren't you? And I didn't. It was a nice little cameo, that, but I didn't really get a chance to talk to you. So it's lovely to see your face again. And Prut sends his apologies, and we send best wishes to Burnsy.
That we do, of course.
So the season kicks off on Saturday. Lots of things going on at Hull City. Of course there is, because it's just one of those football clubs that you never get a minute. Even in the off season, you never get a minute. So Fletch, what have you got for us? What's occurring?
Well, thank you to everyone who sent their questions through. As always, we've got a lovely mix today of sensible and silly. So, but we'll go sensible first, but portrayed in a silly way. Nathaniel Whittingham says in big block capitals, "Talk about McBurnie," with 4 E's after it. So go on, Baz, get things started. Where are we at?
Is he the striker they've been talking about?
I think so. Yes.
Right.
The one who many people portray as to be a little bit like a house built on a certain substance. Can't say because kids could be listening.
Yeah, we're big in nurseries around the country, particularly East Yorkshire nurseries. So as we understand it, finally, after 3 months of talks, it looks like Oliver McBurnie will be a Hull City player. It was off. It was on. It was off. It was on, and I could probably repeat that for the duration of the show, that it was on and off. On Friday, it was said to me the gut feeling was that it wouldn't happen. But as we know in football, and particularly with transfers, things can change fairly quickly. We spoke to Sergei Yakirovich after Saturday's friendly draw with Getafe, and he sort of indicated that the club had given McBurnie a deadline of essentially by the end of the weekend to decide. And I think that's fair. They've been weighing up their options. He's been understandably weighing up his options. He had domestic interest. He was wanted back in Spain. And they finally made a breakthrough yesterday with him and his people. So that looks like that deal is going to get done. I think he's expected at the MKM Stadium, or certainly around the club on Monday night to do his media and stuff like that. So finally they get their man. Now they'll be hoping, of course, that they can find the form from McBurnie. I think it was in 2018-19 at Swansea where he scored 22 goals. He's not scored too many since then. But I think this signing has become something of almost like a status, a symbol of City's summer, really. And I think they invested so much time and effort. Jared Dublin had spoken to him a lot. Obviously, the manager had spoken to him a lot. And I think they put so much into it. And I think if they'd not have got him, they would have been really, really disappointed. And I guess the question would have been, well, where do they go now? But they put an awful lot. Say what you want about City over the summer, but they put an awful lot of work into this. And I guess for them, it's culmination of a lot of work, a lot of hours of work and investment in time, and now money in a player that they really like. He's 29. He's still at a decent age, and the manager really wants him. So, there's always the caveat that this is Hull City, and until the ink on the contract is dry, I wouldn't be getting his name printed on my shirt just yet, or a tattoo of McBurnie across my forehead. But for those that have been celebrating or wanting to celebrate McBurnie Day, probably get the kind of the template on your computer ready to press print.
It's a nice summary there. Is that your version of "Here We Go" from certain Fabrizio, Baz? Telling people to get a screenshot ready or something.
Well, I wouldn't want to get people to commit to having tattoos on the face, you know, and then it fall down. A bit like we saw with Thomas Asante a year ago when I was told it was done and dusted, and it wasn't, clearly, because he didn't sign and he went to Coventry. So there's always that element of caution, and it is such a high profile deal. And as I say, they've put a lot of work in. So, you know, the signs are positive. The theory is that the feeling is it's there, but until he's turning out, at some point on Saturday in a Hull City shirt, let's wait and see. But yeah, as I say, it's a big signing for them. It's good. It's an expensive one. It's lucrative for Oli McBurnie. 3 years plus one on a good contract. So, Catherine, what's your assessment of the whole McBurnie saga? Because it has become a bit of a saga, hasn't it? Will he, won't he? The EFL said no. Then they seem to find a way with the EFL to get it through. Where are you at with it?
Yeah, I think my concern would have been if it hadn't have happened, kind of, what the backup plan would have been. So obviously for them to get it hopefully, done is really good news. And it's one of those things where it's an exciting one because it feels like finally we've got a striker that's kind of proven at championship level. We know that he can score goals, in this division. It does feel a little bit like we're putting a lot of, not pressure, but like a lot of kind of expectation is going to be on him to get the goals that we didn't get last season. So hopefully he's got kind of shoulders strong enough to kind of carry that burden. But he is sort of the type of player I think we've needed for a long time. He's good in the air. He's good in the 6-yard box. He can get goals. He can hold the ball up. He can be a little bit nasty if you need him to be. He can be clever as well. I'll always go back to that game at Sheffield United a few years ago where he helped get Benjamin Tete sent off, which if you've got that type of player playing for you, you very much kind of want him on your team rather than playing against you. So I do think it's a great signing. Hopefully, as I say, he won't kind of be the only person that's kind of getting goals. Hopefully can kind of spread that burden, as I say, a little bit throughout the team, so it's not all kind of on him. But it's a very good signing from my point of view.
It can be a focal point, can't he? You can play into him, you can play off him, and we know from what we've seen from this team so far in pre-season that they like to get the ball out wide. They look like, particularly with how Ryan Giles is flying and getting crosses in. He's good in the air, isn't he, as well? And just with his back to goal, he's effective, isn't he? So that obviously he's coming in to score goals, and they will want him to fire more than he has in the last few years. But what we need to see from City this year is goals coming from everywhere else, not just relying on one player to get 20 goals or 15 goals. Everybody else has got to be chipping in, haven't they? And he can play a key role in that setup, can't he? In that build. Yeah,
especially if he's kind of got players in and around him. It felt like João Pedro. He tried to do that at times last season. It just didn't kind of seem to work for whatever reason. But I think maybe McBurnie a little bit more mobile potentially. If he's got somebody playing off him in that, whether it's a number 10 or whether it's a second striker or even the two wingers kind of coming in, if he can sort of lay the ball off and help get other players goals as well, then that would be huge.
Fletch, when I said earlier, the signing has become a bit of a statement for the club. Given all the noise with the embargo, the fee restrictions, all that sort of stuff, signing McBurnie has become, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because it's become bigger in reality. It's become bigger than it probably would have been in normal circumstance. It has almost become like a statement for the football club to get him in, hasn't it? And also as if the fans have taken to him already. And what that signing means, and it's kind of almost like a talismanic signing type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. Because, well, let's put it this way: they need strikers, don't they? I mean, I know they've brought Destin in as well, but Carl Joseph, there's probably a little bit of unwanted pressure on him, given he didn't score last year. But we've caveated that with the fact he didn't have many shooting opportunities last year. But McBurnie, people might look at what he did with Las Palmas and see that he only scored 3 goals in 32 outings, I think it was. But the season before, he scored 6 in 21 in the Premier League, which is not a bad return at all. And
in a struggling team that got relegated, by the way.
Exactly. And the other thing about that, which I think is really interesting, looking at where he scored them, they all came at home. And that's something that we're crying out for, aren't we, at the MKM Stadium? We're crying out for a little bit more positivity and someone who can score in front of their own crowd. So that's good. I like what KB says about obviously having someone in there who's nasty and can rough up the opposition as well, because I've always had this feeling for the last couple of years that City have been a little bit nice, perhaps a little bit, I mean, soft is maybe a bit harsh on them, but there's not been many players in that team where, you know, they're going to grab someone by the collar or something and be a little bit dirty or have the dark arts as one or two managers in the past have always wanted from the team. Danny Hawkins asks, apologies to be greedy if the McBurnie deal goes through. What would we say is the next position of need? In my opinion, I know we've got Lundstram, but Alzati has left. We need another number 6 protecting the back 4. And Tom Lehman says, after McBurnley and Akintola, who we'll come into in a moment, how many more signings do the tricky Tigers want?
Well, I think they definitely still want a player that can play 6 or 8. Obviously, they've signed Lundstram, and that's a very, very good signing. And you're right. I think when I look at the spine of the team, it's getting stronger, isn't it? When you think of the goalkeeper, although he's not had a great pre-season, but he only had a poor start to last season, but he did get better and he was fully deserving, Evo, of the player of the year. I mean, he had an absolute, I don't know if he was playing with his slippers on Saturday, but every kick he made was a terrible one, and it went straight to, it either put his own players under pressure or went to a Getafe player. But I think if you look at the spine of that team now, you've got, you know, whether it be Hughes and Egan, Hughes and Ajay, you then go Lundstram, Crooks, up to McBurnie at the top. Suddenly the spine of that team looks you know, competitive and strong when you feel that they're going to do all right. I mean, I think they still want. Look, we're only just into August, and you've basically got another month of the window left yet. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and they've got the majority of their business done fairly well, fairly early, haven't they? You know, certainly before the season starts, compared to where we were a year ago. Certainly, I still think they want another midfielder. Obviously, you reference Steven Alzati. He's got a 5-year deal, by the way, in Atlanta. So that's credit to him to get a 5-year deal out in the MLS. So, but yeah, I mean, I still think they're light in midfield. You know, you've got Matazo, but he's not back until Christmas. I think Zambrano if I'm honest, I think Zambrano gets done at some point. Whether that's how that looks is dependent on the outcome of the appeal on Wednesday. But I think Zambrano will get done at some point. But I still think they want another midfielder, and they want another creative player. I put this question to Sergei on Saturday because I watched that game against Getafe, and yes, it was against very, very good. Let's not forget they finished 13th in La Liga, so they're a very good side. But I watched that game and I kind of pieced together what I've seen in pre-season. And whilst I've been impressed, the lack of creativity has still been evident at times for me, particularly through the middle of the park. Not so much from wide, because I think Kamara has created not nearly enough, but I think Giles on the other side has created. But it's in that middle of the park. Casey Palmer has looked okay in moments. But again, as is always the case with Casey, is consistency in delivering it week after week, and we just don't see it. So hopefully that comes. So I think they want another player in that. Sergei said to me on Saturday he wants another player in that area, another player to create. They need to be better, which brings us on to Joe Gelhardt. You know, obviously we've put out this morning that the club are trying to sign Gelhardt. He's desperate to come back. He really wants to come back to the football club. And that's music to the manager's ears, because he only wants players that want to come and play for the football club. That they don't want to come. He doesn't want players that want to come for a big fat paycheck. And I think there's been one or two of those over the last couple of years that have come solely for a big fat paycheck. But Gelhardt is one of those. Perhaps Gelhardt, and we'll come on to this in a bit, but with the team. But I think perhaps you can get Gelhardt in that number 10 role behind McBurnie, behind a Carl Joseph. We don't know what we're going to get from Enis Destan. Let's be honest. His stats up to now, you know, they're not jumping off the page, are they? So, and he's not fully fit. That's the other thing as well. He's come with a knee complaint. You know, not serious, but he's come with a knee problem. So we just don't know what we're going to get. I'm not writing him off, of course, but he's unproven, isn't he? And we've touched on this before about the success of players coming from the Super League and into the Championship and how that works out. So I think I would go. You've got McBurnie up from. You need to find somebody in that number 10 that can create a bit more. Is that something you kind of feel is necessary as well, Catherine?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing with Gelhardt as well, I think, he's not got a amazing goal scoring record at championship level. Obviously, he did get, enough to help us stay up last season. I do think, playing alongside players that he's now knows quite well again in this division would help him. He obviously had, second half of last season with us. He knows a lot of the squad well. He clearly, the fact he wants to come back showed he enjoyed his time here. So that's a real positive. And just like we were mentioning before, if you had him playing off McBurnie or just behind him, that could be a partnership that you'd think logically should work really well in terms of McBurnie knocking the ball down to him, him potentially either scoring or creating something. That's kind of the dream, really, isn't it? And I think it was a move that would make sense to bring him back. And like I say, I think the fact he wants to be here is a big thing, and hopefully that's something they can get done. Because I just think it's all kind of well and good, sort of as you were talking about, just now in terms of bringing in players that we maybe not sure about or maybe haven't got the past experience of playing in this division. At least Gelhardt has that now. He's got quite a few seasons of playing, maybe not playing as much as he would have liked, but he knows what the division is about. He's got experience. He has managed to score a few goals for us. So if he came back, I think that would be just a move that would make sense for probably both parties.
And Fletch, Gelhardt's 23. He needs, yes, they obviously can't sign him at this stage on a permanent deal. Whether that changes by the end of the week, we'll have to wait and see. But at the minute, Gelhardt is a player that he's still got his best years ahead of him, hasn't he? And he did settle in really well. Yeah, he scored 5 goals, and yes, I know 3 of those were penalties, but you've still got to put him in, particularly under the pressure that City were under. But he was lively, wasn't he? The fans loved him. He seemed to really take to being at Hull City. Obviously, he's got Charlie Hughes, Carl Joseph, etc. As well. It just feels like that's a good fit. He's a good character. He's bubbly. He's bright. You need those characters around. And he might not play every week with the rotations with other players that are coming back in Miller, Bellumi, etc. And you've got Ndala. They have, if he comes in, they've got options, haven't they? But Gelhardt just feels like a good fit, doesn't he?
He does feel like a good fit. It's always good to have a player back. I think if they have that investment, if they have that enjoyment of being around the football club that they've just been at, and they've got that appetite to come back again, that's obviously something that's very positive for the fan base. I'm just, whilst you've been discussing that, I've just been doing some numbers on Destin and trying to compare him to somebody else who's played for City, because the numbers, I always err on the side of caution with some appearance and goal figures, because Destin last year played 500 minutes despite playing 18 games. So if you total up his goal per minute in the last 2 seasons with Trabzon, so it was 1 every 200 minutes. So if you can keep him fit and get, let's pick a figure out, if you get 35 games out of him, that you are sort of looking towards near enough double figures, which wouldn't be a bad return. And Connolly, in his time at Hull City, was another one who didn't necessarily have lots of 90-minute matches, and he went along at an average of around 158, 159 minutes. So, okay, Destin needs a bit more time to get on the score sheet, but I still think, like Joe Gelhardt, there's 2 23-year-old forwards that you've got around the place who have got a willingness to learn. As you referenced, they haven't come across for big lucrative contracts in this case. That they're here and they want to play under this manager who seems to be getting a tune out of 1 or 2 of those who've already signed. So I think for Gelhardt especially, yeah, it's a bit of a no-brainer for me if they can get him in on loan. I think a question that I would then ask is, if you've got Gelhardt, you've got Ndula, and you've got Lundstrom, there's 2 more spaces in a matchday squad for loanees, which I suppose, do you look at a midfielder on loan, Baz, to go back to a previous point?
Yeah, that's my
for?
understanding, that the midfielder would be a loan signing. And obviously, there's also Mattia Freegan, who seems really keen to come as well. But obviously that isn't a loan signing. That would only be a permanent if they get their bottom tickled, if you like, and get away with the appeal. But even then, you've also got the financial element of it. Can you carry a wage bill with the Freegan as well as McBurnie and Gelhardt? Gelhardt's salary, as I understand it, doubled automatically when they got promoted Leeds. So, he's on a hefty amount of money at Ellen Road. Obviously, there is going to be some. If the deal gets done, there would be some situation there where Leeds are going to have to help City, because City will not be able to pay. Clearly, won't be able to pay Joe's salary, Premier League salary, and I'm not sure any club, even the promoted club, the relegated clubs with parachutes, could pay what Gelhardt is now earning at Leeds because of the Premier League clause that kicked in. So, the loan thing, the midfielder that they're looking at would be a loan, if that is possible. But we'll have to wait and see.
Possibly a bit light then in the long term at the end of the season, because unless they can then move on financially and maybe try and tie some of these players down on permanent deals, we'll have to wait and see. KB, Tom, the Brandsham Tiger asks, it's quite an interesting question, this, and I think fans will have an interesting opinion on it too. He asks, do you think this, he cites it as an embargo, this restrictive embargo, do you actually think we've had a better window than ever before with the championship quality players that we have brought in? To which John also comes in on this and says, we have had to plan properly and not sign players on a whim. Very sensible, very intelligent. We've finally realised what type of player is needed in this league, and we finally have a big, strong spine. Jared Dublin has worked really hard on this, but the poor fellow is working 24/7, says Tom. So I don't think it's the best window they've ever had in the Championship, KB, but do you take his point of it's a bit like blinkers on a racehorse, and it's given them a really narrow channel of players that they can go for, and they're not scattergunning as they have in previous seasons?
Yeah, I do think there's an element of that. They've kind of been forced to be sensible in a way. And not, as you know, that's not to say that they wouldn't have been, whether that embargo wasn't in place, but just on kind of previous experience of some of maybe the players that we've brought in that haven't necessarily worked out. As you say, they have been forced to kind of go for the free transfers and the loans. And, Jared's obviously brought in a few players that he's worked with before. And has had a real clear plan of, what he's been able to go after, but also what kind of makes sense. And yeah, in a way, it's interesting to think, whether that embargo hadn't have been in place with the restrictions, whether they would have gone down the same route or whether they would have gone, potentially in a different direction. But it does feel like that in a little bit of, that it's kind of forced them to be sensible, and it feels like a sensible window. Like I think it's one that, with McBurnie coming in, it gives you a little bit more kind of excitement, adding a striker that we have seen score a lot of goals at this level. I think maybe if he hadn't have come in, it would have felt sort of just steady, but I think he adds a little bit of gloss to it. And yeah, I feel a lot more kind of comfortable with the people they've brought through this time around than last summer when we didn't have an embargo, but obviously everything was still kind of done very late last summer. So it's interesting. I guess we'll never know kind of what might have happened if that hadn't have been in place, but it does feel like it's forced them to be sensible.
And the thing is, Catherine, last season was completely scattered. Obviously, Tan Kesler was heading it up last summer, and it was all very scattergun, wasn't it? It was all done very late. We got to the end of July, and the only new signing was Cody Drama. Yes, Gilo had arrived, but that was an obligation to buy. What was it? 14 or 15 players arrived after the pre-season friendly, the final one of the summer. So effectively, if you think of where we were, we've just played Getafe in the final pre-season friendly. Effectively, a year ago, 14 players, I think it was, arrived from now onwards. Which is, and look, don't get me wrong, some of the signings were very, very good. Charlie Hughes, very, very good signing. Liam Miller and Mo Balumi, very good signings. It's just, it was a disaster. And it kind of, I guess, fitted how the season went, that they should get injured end of October, beginning of November, within 10 days of each other. In isolation, there was some very good sign. Carl Rushworth was a fantastic signing, but he obviously, he got injured. They'd already signed with Choppy. They'd got Ivor Pandor as well. So it was just the whole thing was just a mess, and it was the timing. Everything was last minute. Whereas now they've been able to get players in, and you go into Coventry on Saturday feeling in a better place that you could put a team out that's going to be strong and competitive. No, it's not going to be the finished article. We know that. But there will be other teams in the Championship also who are not the finished article because of the window, and because the window doesn't close until the end or the 1st of September. And as we all know this, that Premier League clubs, sometimes release players, some of the better players, towards the back end of the window. So there's that side of it as well. And also, you've got to take into account, as you say, Catherine, that the situation that City are in with the embargo restriction, however you want to phrase it, there's a limit to what they can do. So to be able to get somebody like John Lundstrom, to be able to get Shemi Ajay, who's been brilliant in pre-season, to get Femiwo, who's a really solid backup, to if assuming that the McBurnie thing gets done and dusted, he's having his medical today, he's expected at the ground tonight for his media. That's in their position, that's a good sign. If they can get Gelhardt over the line, another really, really good signing, and one or two more to come over the next couple of weeks. So, given their restrictions, and given, let's be honest as well, they survived on goal difference. So they're at, players are looking. There will be some players that have looked at it and gone, well, I'm not sure. Club under a transfer embargo only survived on goal difference. I'm not sure I want to go there. I'll go somewhere safer. So that's the other side of it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And you can imagine sort of earlier in the summer, there might have been more players sort of put off by everything that was kind of coming out of the club. And that is a credit to, the likes of Dublin as well, for convincing the players that have decided to sign to come in. And it does feel like everything's looking a little bit more positive than it did, maybe a month or so ago. And even though that it is still kind of up in the air in terms of kind of whether this restriction is going to be lifted or not, the business that they have done has been pretty wise by the looks of it so far. And as I say, I think the way Dublin's gone about it, you have to kind of give him, a lot of credit for that. And as you say, if they're convincing the likes of, Lundstrom didn't need to come in. He's a player that has got experience. Maybe could have gone elsewhere, but I think is a player that we've been kind of crying out for in midfield for a long time. Just someone to kind of shore things up and just be like a real kind of, I know he's not going to be a captain, but almost kind of like have that kind of leadership role in the middle of the park. I think we've needed that for such a long time. So yeah, absolutely. I think Jared's done pretty well in the last few weeks.
And Fletch, just before I come on to a couple of other players that we've not mentioned, really, the impact of the manager as well. The players really like him. He's obviously had a big impact. Yes, I know it's pre-season and results, in essence, don't mean a huge amount. And you can't, because you've won 5 games, it doesn't suddenly mean you're going to, start flying in the championship. But given the narrative around the football club and the fact that the club last year couldn't win a game for toffee, really, the fact that the manager's come in, he steadied the ship amongst everything, all the kind of the choppy waters around the football club. Inside, he's created a squad that are completely at ease with what they're being asked to do, are enjoying their football, and obviously players talk as well. And I don't doubt that there are players that in the City dressing room that are talking to others and saying, yeah, I know it's a bit chaotic with the transfer embargo, but actually the manager's got his head screwed on. He's really good to play for, and we can have a good season because there are some good players here.
Yeah, he seems to have, on reflection of what we've heard from him so far, he seems to have that balance of not just obviously trying to implement a tactical philosophy with the balance of man management. However, but I think he just gets it from our point of view, because he doesn't shy away from any question, which I think that proves that he's got an open door policy for players to come and have a chat with him. Whereas I think in previous managers, it's not necessarily been the case. It certainly wasn't the case with Tim Volta. It was documented by, I think, Burstone, Slater came out and said a couple of things like that. I think I get the feeling that the way that they've gone about this window, despite the restrictions and how they're playing it, it seems like the focus has now switched in a way to it being a project rather than it being trying to fast track their way up the table. And of course, they want to try and finish as high as possible. That's obviously a certainty. But I think there's a bit more realistic reflection on what's happened in the last season. And I think the pressure might be off Jurkovic in this instance. I don't think it's going to be the case where we see Jurkovic being booted at the end of the season if they don't finish in the top 10, even though they've said that's the aim. I think there has to be a sense of realism, and I think everyone seems to be on the same page with that. I like what I'm seeing from pre-season. Okay, results don't matter in the long run. 5 wins and 2 draws, but we've seen progression tactically, and it seems, as you say, Baz, like it feels like it's beginning to turn into one big happy family again, and the transfers we've seen so far, I think, are helping to present a clearer identity of where everyone stands in the team as well.
And Catherine, I think one of the key things as well that that Sergei reiterated to me on Saturday, was in his first press conference. He made it clear that he wouldn't come in with a dossier of, this is my philosophy. You will eat my philosophy. You will sleep with it. You will drink it. You will, read it 24 hours a day. And then in turn, the players get out on the pitch and are frozen. And if there's something that's been missed in the philosophy that happens on the pitch, they're like, well, I don't know what to do now. I'm frozen. He's adapted to the players that he's got, hasn't he? He said in his first press conference, I will adapt to what I've got. He said it to me again on Saturday that, I've adapted what I want, to suit the players. And I think that shows a great deal of humility from the manager, because we see, and this isn't meant as a criticism to anybody at all, but we see so many managers now that have got their philosophy, as they call it, and they will not deviate from that. Russell Martin is one. Liam Rossini was one of those. Tim Walter was one of those. That they have their ideology, and they do it to the nth degree, all day, every day, and they don't deviate from that. Yes, they have different ways of developing the system, but ultimately it is the system. Whereas with Sergei, he's aware of how modern football is, but ultimately football's never changed from when it was invented a million years ago. It's get it forward and score goals. It's not rocket science. It's not. You don't need to overcomplicate it. And I think that's what he's been keen to stress to his players.
It's refreshing actually to kind of hear a manager sort of be open and say that he's not completely wedded to one style of play, and that he is open to adapting to the players that he has. And I think that's a really positive thing, because the championship is such a weird division that you come up against all different types of teams where you're going to need to play one way one week and a different way another week. And sometimes I think managers are a little bit too rigid in the styles of play that they want to, execute, and they don't want to kind of go away from that. So actually, I think him saying that is, as I say, it's quite refreshing to hear a manager be honest and say, look, I want to play a certain way, but I'm happy to kind of adapt and change if need be. Because I think there will be times in the season where he does have to play a slightly different way depending on who the opposition is. And I think that's just kind of how the championship works. So I think that's a great thing. And I have to say, I think everything that we've seen from him so far has been really encouraging, considering he's obviously not got, that championship experience. I don't think he could have done more to kind of reassure the fans going into the first game in terms of kind of the type of coach that we've got, in terms of, having that relationship with the players early on, trying to play the best football possible, but also being open to play in different ways. I think he's been, pretty impressive. And obviously, like we say, you can't read loads into pre-season, but so far, I think, I don't think he could have done more to kind of get fans and players on side.
And I think the other thing as well, like we saw on Saturday, actually, that if you think the Tuesday night game against Sunderland, it was a really vibrant performance. It was all action. It was a really interesting game. Saturday was a very different type of game where they, for after the first 20, 25 minutes, when Getafe woke up and, were over their jet lag, they dominated the ball, and City just had to camp in and soak up pressure. Yes, Getafe had quite a lot of shots on target, but they were largely from, poor kickouts and mistakes. There are going to be games this season where City need to be resolute. They might need to do this on Saturday at Coventry, where they've got to sit in and weather a storm for 10, 15 minutes and be, just clear it and just protect their goal. And so that was Saturday was almost a good exercise of seeing that side of the game. We saw it on Tuesday night where they can attack, they can go forward, they can play forward at pace, they can get crosses in. We saw the attacking side of the game against Getafe. We saw the other side of the game that is going to be a real, it's so important for this season that they've got that to their game, isn't it?
Was that for me or Fletch?
Well, whoever, feel free.
Go on, KB.
When you were saying that, actually, it does feel like Frank Lampard's kind of from his kind of past, managerial spells. He likes to try and dominate the ball, doesn't he? And Coventry being the home team, having obviously been in the playoffs last season and almost getting promoted, there's a lot more expectation on them than there is on us going into that first game. And you expect them to come out kind of all guns blazing in front of a home crowd, which I think they'll probably have sold out most of their tickets. They were getting big crowds towards the end of last season. You're expecting them to be on the ball from the off, and it's going to be about City maybe trying to pick them off on the break. Potentially that might be the way that he goes to play. I think the fact that you have that test at the weekend where maybe you haven't got the ball as much, and you just got to kind of defend and be organised. And actually, that's something that we know City did do well in the end of last season, was actually defensively. Obviously, that start where they didn't concede kind of more than 2 goals after that defeat at Burnley. They had only conceded 1 goal in the game, which was pretty impressive. So defensively, I think there are sort of maybe less concerns. And, if they have to spend large periods without the ball against Coventry, then hopefully that kind of preparation has done them good.
Fletch, on the subject, before we kind of wrap up signings for the time being, we've not mentioned Brandon Williams. Obviously, he's kept coming on trial. We wrote the other day that City are going to be offering him a contract. Is that a wise move, do you think? Obviously, he's had a really, as we touched on last week, he's had a really, really difficult couple of years. We know about his suspended prison sentence that he got back in May, but he seems to be, on board and keen and willing to try and make a go of this. And if City can get the player that burst on the scene at Manchester United, well, they've got one hell of a player on their hands, haven't they?
Of course they have. Yeah, of course they have. I think it's one of those situations where there isn't a lot of jeopardy. There's not a lot that the club can lose out on by bringing in Brandon Williams. Now, you create a competitive rivalry between Ryan Giles and him in the long term to see.
And he can play right back, by the way.
Can play right back as well. So you're stocking up that right-hand side as well. Even though we might have our ideas of the pecking order of what we want for right back too. So, yeah, I don't think it's a massive gamble, to be brutally honest. And it's in a way, if you want to spin it even more positively, I think it's a good way that the club are showing that they're offering an olive branch to someone to get their career back on track. Because as you say, Baz, Manchester United had him once upon a time. He was at Ipswich under Kieran McKenna. There's definitely a player there, and he just needs, a little bit of that guidance, if you like, to just get his career back on track. I know you say you wanted to wrap up transfers, but a couple of fans are asking. CJ asks, "Is it time to let Abu Kamara leave?" And I'm just looking for the other one that mentions Kamara as well.
Yeah, you meant there was somebody at the top of the show, wasn't there, about Kamara?
Yeah, Coxey said, "Do you reckon Kamara will leave this window? We seem to have a lot of wingers now, and Kamara has failed to impress me from what I've seen of him."
It's a good question, and I think it's one the club are probably contemplating as well, because they've got obviously Joel Ndala, who looks really bright. As I said on the show last week, he reminds me of a bit more of a raw Jadon Philogene, and Philogene was pretty raw at times. But the caveat with Joel, and I think I really like that signing, I've got to say, but he's not played a championship game yet, so it's one to see how he looks playing at that level. Dave Akintola is coming in. He's not trained yet. He's obviously vastly experienced. The 29 Nigerian player, Nigerian winger, right winger. But again, he's another player from the Super League. So without being disparaging, and I'm not at all, I'm just looking at the facts in front of me and looking at what I've experienced over the last 3.5 years. The jury, for me, will be out until we see him play in the Championship and his ability to play Saturday, Tuesday. you've got Liam Miller and Mohamed Baloumi are expected back around about the international break in September. So, perhaps could they feature at Swansea in the first game back after the break, which will be the 5th game of the season. Sergei said to me that Mo is slightly ahead of Liam now in his recovery. They've sort of swapped over a couple of times in their respective recoveries. But I think Liam did more damage to his knee than Mo did when they did their respective ACLs. You've got Gelhardt if he does come, that can play out wide. So yeah, in terms of Kamara, I think the manager likes him, but I think the manager gets frustrated with him because I think he thinks that Kamara's got the talent, but perhaps necessarily doesn't believe in himself or doesn't deliver consistently enough. So it's one to watch before the window closes, without doubt. I mean, there was interest earlier in the window. Rangers were interested. There was a phone call from Rangers. We know Portsmouth would like him back at Fratton Park. There's no secret there. Their sporting director or CEO or whoever it was, forgive me, has gone on record as saying they would like him back. So it's one to watch, isn't it? If somebody stumps up, if somebody comes in with, a half decent offer for him, I think they'd certainly consider it, particularly with Mo and Liam not too far away. So yeah, that's one to watch is Mo.
I think for Kamara especially, if you pick those two clubs, Rangers and Pompey will pay probably a good figure to get him back because they adore him. Rangers being the other one, Russell Martin has been quite keen to get Championship stock in to add to his Rangers side. And I also think, and this is delving into the hypothetical world, I think it's possible that if Kamara goes to the SPL, where he's playing in one of the two giants of the division, he's going to get a lot more attacking opportunity if he plays. So he may get more goals. If I was Hull City, I'd not necessarily be thinking about the fee, but I'd also be thinking about what the sell-on could be for him, because there have been one or two players in the past who have been able to turn quite a decent value from moving from either the Premier League or from abroad into the SPL and then moving on into the Premier League or even back into the Championship. So if they wanted to maybe stick a 10%, 15% sell-on there with what they get already, you could, if he does very, very well, you could bank another £1 million in the future, which wouldn't be noses wouldn't be turned, would they, by a 7-figure sum coming their way? But of course, that's completely hypothetical. We'll have to wait and see.
Just want to answer a quick question that's come up whilst we've been on there about McBurnie and his medical. So obviously we said last night he's having his medical. City generally have their medicals in London. So McBurnie going to London to have his medical in London is not unusual. There's a facility there that they use. They have a deal with, and generally their players go to that facility in London. So McBurnie is going for his medical there today, and he's expected. We're recording Monday. We're expecting McBurnie at the MKM Stadium at some point later on Monday. Now, people will be asking about his fitness. Obviously, he's not played any fitness pre-season games because he's been training away. He's not been at a club, obviously. I would expect that he would be fit enough to be on the bench at Coventry. Maybe start at Wrexham in the Cup, or give him an hour, or build his fitness up, maybe half an hour, whatever. You would imagine he'd be in a situation where he could play 20 minutes off the bench if required at Coventry, but he certainly wouldn't be. I'd be astonished if he started because he's not played any games. But yeah, in terms of transfers, Catherine, what are we on the 5th of August? Anything can, just to wrap it up, anything can happen, can't it? Players, there's going to be departures. There will be some departures. There's going to be more incomings. Obviously, a lot hinges on what happens with the appeal on Wednesday, and then we find out hopefully within 48 hours. But it's Hull City and it's the transfer window. All bets are off. Anything can happen, can't it?
What do you want me to do? The Mick McCarthy? It can. When was the last time you had a quiet transfer deadline day, Baz? Because I feel like the ones at City have never been quiet at all.
Before I worked in football.
Oh, right, fair.
I used to sit watching it on Sky, watching the last couple of hours on Sky Sports News, and there'd be people in Stoke with prophylactics in behind reporters' heads. Those were the quiet transfer deadline days for me.
Are you expecting any of the young players that we've seen get quite a few chances in pre-season to go out on loan? I'm thinking of Nathan Tinsdale seems to have played a lot and had a lot of opportunities, and obviously has got a goal in a couple of games. Is it? It always happens in pre-season, doesn't it? Where the young players, they're in and around it, and then as soon as you get more bodies in the building, they sort of end up, kind of going back to the academy kind of setup. But is it any of them, do you think, got a chance of sort of sticking around the team and being in and around the first team, or are you expecting some to go on loan, or are they just kind of filling in for pre-season?
Difficult one to answer, and good question, I think. But like Nathan Tinsdale really fancies himself. I spoke to him the other day. He's like, I've earned my chance. Obviously, I was in and around it last year. Essentially got bombed off when they signed a load of players back in the 21s. I feel I'm ready for the championship. Harry Vaughan's been in and around it. I think Farrell Brown's really impressed in pre-season, but he would benefit from going out and playing League One, League Two, and getting 35, 40, 45 games under his belt if possible. Because I don't see how when Miller and Bellumi are back, and you've got Akintola, assuming he comes in and does well. Obviously, Joel and Darla. I don't see how Farrell Brown gets in ahead of those. And he needs to go and play men's football. So 21s football is great, but it's not men's football. Tinsdale, I kind of feel that he's probably the closest, but we'll have to wait and see. I think a lot hinges on what happens in the transfer market over the next couple of weeks. But that leads me into my next question. Well, the question I was going to ask after the next one, but we'll go with it now. Just quickly, starting 11 for Coventry. Catherine, what would be yours?
Oh, it's a difficult question now, isn't it? I'm trying to think of who I'd play, what system I would play. I mean, I think the back four and obviously the goalkeeper, that kind of picks itself. It's a question of whether you play Egan or a Jay alongside Hughes. I think it's obviously Panda, Giles, Hughes, one of Egan and a Jay. I think I'd be happy with either of them, and then probably Drame at right back. I don't know if Louis Coyle has got over his injury or is going to be fit, but I think I'd probably still go with Drame anyway, in case, just because even if Coyle is back fit, he's probably going to be a little bit behind fitness wise. Midfield is a really tricky one. I mean, you'd probably have, if we're doing 4-3-3, I mean, you'd have Slater in there and Crooks in there. I don't know who you'd have in there.
Lundstrom.
The sitting one, yeah, it would be Lundstrom, wouldn't it? I'm just thinking how you'd kind of balance I guess Slater and Crooks would probably. They sometimes feel like it felt like they were a little bit too similar, but I think you'd probably play both of those. If you're saying McBurnie's not going to be fit, if Kyle Joseph Kamara. Who plays alongside them? And Darla, maybe Joseph through the middle.
So that's the big question for me: is what he does left side, because what he does left side, for me, hinges on the rest of the team. So yeah, Pandor in goal, the back four: Giles, obviously, Cody right back, yeah, Charlie Hughes, and then I'd probably go with Jai, thinking against potentially Ellis Sims, Hadji Wright. It's then what does he do? Left side, because he's obviously going to. I think Carl Joseph will start through the middle up top. Then Palmer will start in the number 10, and Kamara obviously on the right. Does he go Lundstrom and Crooks in the two that sit in front of the back four? If he does, fine. But what does he decide? He's gone with Tinsdale recently, but does he think Tinsdale's up to starting away at Coventry, which will be a bear pit at 12:30, or does he go? Does he not take that risk? Does he shove Palmer wide left and drop Slater in alongside Lundstrom and push Crooks into the 10? Does he start Ndala? Ndala's not start. Obviously, he's had a couple of run-outs off the bench. He's not played at championship level. Does he chuck him in straight away when you're going to need a disciplined... With away at Coventry first game, you're going to need disciplined wingers to get back and help. Kamara's going to have to get back and help Drame, and whoever plays left side is going to have to get back and help Gilo. So does he risk Ndala? Does he same principle with Tinsdale, or does he play it a bit safer and go Kamara? Personally, I don't think he will. I think he's stuck with Tinsdale. I think he'll stick with him at Coventry. What does that influence your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think so. But then I think if we've got this, I don't know who you would play through the middle then, but you almost think, well, Kyle Joseph would probably do quite a good job getting back on the wing if he had to, but you've got, until McBurnie's ready to start, you haven't really got anyone else to play through the middle, have you? You'd have to play like
through the middle, don't you?
it just wouldn't work.
No, I don't think so.
Interesting that Palmer. Would you think that Palmer's starting just because the manager sort of that's his first choice in the 10? Obviously, he used to play for Coventry, because you kind of seemed a little bit unsure in terms of how he'd done in pre-season. Do you just think it's kind of like he's the first choice as it stands?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's it. I would say Palmer's got the shirt, but it wouldn't surprise me if Palmer was either taken out or moved left and Crooks was pushed forward to get Slater alongside Lundstrom. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Fletch, you've done well here. You've had 5 minutes to think about it.
I'm playing 3-2-5 and I'm shelling it forward.
Egan up front.
Egan up front, Ajayi up front, 2 target men, knocking it down into Joseph round the corner. Piece of cake. It's difficult, isn't it? It is very difficult because if you there's no clear obvious striker if you take Joseph and put him on the left. But I was looking at the 3 midfield in behind if you had Joseph on the left, because Slater can travel down the left as well. Palmer can do so. So even if Joseph sort of slides more centrally and then someone comes up to join the attack on the left-hand side, you'd probably want Palmer there. I think Slater's got more natural midfield balance maybe. So it's difficult, isn't it? But on the other side is, think of the competitiveness that's going on in training at the moment to get the best ability and to get them fired up for it. I think it's going to be one of those afternoons, though, I think it might be one of those where City have to be careful that they don't lose their shape too often, because I think Coventry do have that, whether it be on the counter or just through standard build-up play under Frank Lampard. I think they've got the opportunity really to take centre stage more, with it being their home ground. So I think I wouldn't be at all surprised if City had to sit in a little bit more and absorb a bit of pressure and then try and hit on the counter, to be honest. And that's something that Sergei has done when he was at Kayserispor. I think that, if we go way back in this podcast, I think that ties into the fact that he's adaptable in some of the systems that he plays. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if the frame of the team was a 4-2-3-1, but perhaps a little bit more defensively minded.
Yeah, I think whatever happens on Saturday, excuse me, it isn't the be all and end all, is it? It is the first game, and it's going to be really interesting to see what that City side looks like. And we know he wants 2 players for every position, so he's got decisions to make now. He has got players coming in, different levels of fitness, obviously, but he's going to have options. I wanted to finish with kind of a look ahead, really, to the campaign at large. Now, a lot of pundits, a lot of predictions from fans, well, not so much fans, but obviously we've had George from the Not the Top 20 podcast on here before, friend of the show, love what they do. But Ali from the not the Top 20 podcast was saying he's not feeding City. He thinks they're going to really struggle. A lot of the bookmakers are backing City to be relegated, along with Sheffield Wednesday. Perhaps an easy thing to say, given if you just look at it natively without doing any digging, and you see that City have had some financial troubles, obviously the transfer embargo and restrictions. I think the easy one is to go City, and given the fact they stayed up on goal difference last season, they'll get relegated. Funny enough, I had something from a supercomputer this morning. Again, completely of no relevance. But they've got City finishing 7th. So, Catherine, I'll start with you. Where they are completely impossible to predict, because again, we don't know how some of these signings are going to do. We don't know what the squad's going to look like come September the 2nd. And obviously, you've got a manager who has looked great in pre-season, but how's that going to play out in the Championship? So many questions. But the fact that so many pundits are writing City off for relegation. What do you think about their chances this season?
My friend Ali Maxwell's getting a lot of stick, wasn't he, on Twitter from City fans? No one ever likes to see their team be predicted to go down. I actually don't think it's a bad bad thing to see other people kind of writing us off. I think that should be something that, I don't know how much players listen to that or not, but it should be something that they're told, and they should galvanise them, really, shouldn't it?
When we did the predictions before the season started, the COVID season when City had just been relegated, and we did the local reporter predictions. So there was me, Mike, I think Matt Dean, Burnsy, and Burnsy I can't remember. This is unforgivable, really, but I can't remember what the prediction was. But I think Burnsy predicted City to finish following relegation that League One season. Burnsy predicted City to finish well down the table, and Grant McCann pinned it up in the dressing room. 15th, that was it. And McCann pinned it up in the dressing room and basically said to the players, prove him wrong. So they won't admit it. They might not admit it, but the players will be looking at what we all say, and they'll be out, the manager and the staff and everybody out will be like, if they've said we're going to finish 15th, we're going to prove them wrong. If they've said we're going to get relegated, we want to slap one on the nose for them. We're going to prove them wrong. So yeah, to jump on what you've said there, the players absolutely will take notice of what people are saying.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, at the end of the day, I think people are absolutely entitled to predict us to struggle after, based on last season, based on the fact, they might not know anything about the manager, based on the fact that they've had a transfer embargo. The noise coming out of the club from the outside, if you're not kind of following it day to day, hasn't been good for the last few months. So I can completely understand why people have, predicting this to go down. And then I know City fans were sort of saying, oh, well, if you actually dig into the club, like, realistically, if you're not a fan of that club, you're not probably, around absolutely everything. So I can say I can understand why people have done it. But as I say, I think it should be. So I don't think it's a bad thing for us. I think should be something that kind of motivates, the players to prove people wrong. And like you say, it's very, very difficult to predict this football club because they just, they're the most unpredictable kind of side, I think, in the division possibly. And it's the same. Look, it's the same for Sheffield Wednesday, who are obviously in a much, much worse situation than we are. And everyone's kind of just assumed that they're going to get relegated because of what's going on there. And again, I think people probably entitled to that because they do seem to be in a pretty bad state. But it's so easy to just assume and, pick the clubs that you think might have struggled last season or that have, going through a bad time off the pitch. Realistically, teams can sometimes surprise you. I mean, there was this, I remember the season, that season City went down in the Championship when Wigan went down with them. Wigan only went down because they had a points deduction. And I think people would have predicted them to have gone down. They would have stayed up had it not been for that. So sometimes, clubs that might look like having a rough time off the pitch and haven't done well previously can sometimes surprise you, and that's just the nature of the Championship. There's always a team in the Championship that either gets promoted or is in contention with the playoffs that at the start of the season you would never have expected them to be up there. So yeah, that's why I don't like doing predictions.
No. And Fletch, given everything that's gone on at City, as I say, there's so many caveats to trying to predict. It's a fool's game anyway because you've got no idea. So many caveats, so many potential issues here, there, and everywhere. You don't know what the squad will look like in a month's time. But this squad is infinitely better now than it was a month ago. McBurnie over the line. If they get Gelhardt in, one or two other very good players, William signs permanently. They get Miller and Bellumi back and in form. Suddenly, the landscape looks a bit different. It wouldn't surprise you with this lot if they finish fourth, if they finish 12th. 15th or 23rd. This is a mental football club, and predicting what's going to happen next, you can't predict what's going to happen in 5 minutes, let alone in 5 months. So it is a fool's game, isn't it?
But we have to try and we have to try, don't
yeah,
we? And give some guidance. I think back to last season. And I think about, even though it wasn't pretty in the second half of the season under Ruben Sayers, there wasn't like a consistency of form. There was guile there, and there was grit to go and win away from home. There was a bit of dismay that they weren't winning at home. But they easily got enough points in that second half of the season to get themselves out of the mess they're in, even though it was nip and tuck and went right to the end. But if you stretched out over the full season, City would probably have been well clear of the bottom three. I think a lot of people outside of the local media just look at they look at what's on the surface, the tip of the iceberg, and go, they're in a financial meltdown, they're in trouble, they're going to be doomed for relegation because they're going to have to sell on players, etc. And I don't actually think. I think when you look at what they've brought in and compare it to those that finished around them in the Championship, I would argue that it's at least on a level footing, if not better, than what some of the other clubs around the bottom end of the Championship did last year. Sheffield Wednesday are, in my opinion, doomed. I think there's just far too much going on there for them to get out of the bottom three.
And even Fletch, even if they got taken over by, I know there's a lot of talk about John Textor, but if they get taken over today, suddenly they've got a piece of squad together. And we saw,
well, let's put in context.
We saw how difficult that was for City last year.
Let's put in context how gutted their team is. I was at Scarborough on Friday for a friendly against their under-21 side.
You lucky sea dog.
I have it under authority that at least 8 of those players are going to be either on the bench or starting against Leicester. And Mackenzie Maltby, who's the under-21's captain, was set to start at centre-half. He was on loan at Scarborough last year, but he's just had a knee op, so he's out for 12 weeks. So that just shows really how in dire straits they are as a football club.
That's assuming they play the game as well.
Yeah, speaking to a colleague of mine who has a soft spot for Charlton, he's not really too confident in what they've done over the summer window to suggest that they can be relatively safe. He thinks that they're going to be in a battle in some degree. I think Preston's team has taken a bit of a knocking, losing Emil Rees. But then you look at teams like Pompey have made a couple of good signings. I think getting John Swift is a masterstroke. I would have very happily taken him at Hull City on a free transfer. I think he's one that I would certainly not have grumbled at. But then again, things like injuries can come into play. Managerial sackings and changes of tactical philosophies come into play. If you had to tell me to pick a position now, I reckon Hull City can easily finish sort of top end of the bottom half of the table with what they've got. But who knows? It's a long old season. Phil Brown once got Hull City promoted when they were relegation candidates, and they were the favourites to go down. So it's all relative, isn't it? And we'll see what happens come May.
On that bombshell, let's finish there. So happy new season, everybody. I know that there's a decent herd going down to Coventry Saturday. So enjoy the game. And it'll be nice to have football back, as in competitive football back. And we shall see what happens. Plenty going on, of course, this week with the embargo here. Well, the hearing taking place on Wednesday. City's lawyers will be conducting that with an independent panel. So we will await the outcome of that. And obviously what happens there will shape what happens going forward for Hull City, certainly in the transfer market, at least. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for listening. And as always, sending in your comments and questions. Catherine, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Baz.
And Fletcher, you as well.
Thank you. And apologies to those who are watching this, because I seem to have gone for a reverse Coventry City strip by accident. As I was, as for context, when we put the cameras on to start this, I had a plain white tee on, and I've got a lovely magnolia wall behind me, so it looked
full of character. That wall is
colour up, and this was the first thing I could find.
Yeah, right. Apologies accepted. We shall go up the Tigers. We'll see you again soon.